We've all been told repeatedly for years that China makes fentanyl and sends it to the USA. But that's the opposite of the truth. The deadly drug is made in the Americas and sent across the Pacific. The deadly drug fentanyl is killing, literally, a plane full of Americans every day. I'm not talking about the little private jet Taylor Swift takes to go to a local supermarket. I'm talking about long-haul passenger jets seating 200, 300 people. That many people dying every day. Whose fault is it? Well, the Chinese get blamed, as we saw in the protest in Canada this week. In a shouting match, a woman told the man to go back to Hong Kong and identified him and his people as the source of the problem. This is despite the fact that Hong Kong doesn't make fentanyl or anything related to it. And the only example of the substance in the city was a shipment smuggled in from North America in November and caught by our law enforcement officers. Still, we can't really blame her. It's widely believed that the Chinese are the ones supplying fentanyl to America. Is that really the case? Now, this is too serious a matter for rumours instead of confirmed points of evidence, hard data. So let's take a look. Here are 10 key facts you need to know, and the list includes worrying news from Canada, Australia and other places. First, number one, fentanyl is not from China. The world's biggest producer, distributor and consumer of fentanyl is the United States. That country makes the stuff in many forms, including as a lollipop. Yep, doctors can legally hand them out. Fentanyl lollipops are berry flavoured. Look, none of this is in dispute. Fentanyl is fundamentally a medical product in the category known as opioids, and it's produced in vast amounts in the United States for positive purposes. Use of the product is not negative in itself. Overuse or misuse is the issue. Number two, wrongful use of fentanyl is a very serious problem, but it's largely a US problem, not a global one, so far. The US has just 4.25% of the world's population, but consumes 80% of the entire planet's supply of opioids. Why does one small segment of the world's population use so much of a substance meant for pain relief? There's no clear answer to that, but it must be something to do with the level of pain in society. You can imagine it must be stressful to live in a system in which everyone has to pretend that these two men are the best possible leaders. Having said that, we do see an uptick in opioid use in other countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, Germany. It's not clear why it's limited so far to the countries known as the Global West. Is the adversarial model of democracy itself the problem? Unfettered free press? I don't know. Number three, people in China say that the whole thing is mind-bogglingly ironic. You can see why. The word opioid is derived from the word opium. In the 1800s, certain Western powers worked very hard to get Chinese people addicted to opium and made fat profits from their success. Now people in the US are getting addicted, but is it the fault of the Chinese? Apparently not. Number four, historians trace the rise of the modern era of opioid addiction to 1995 with the US launch of OxyContin, an extraordinarily profitable painkiller made by a company named Purdue Pharma. In the following 20 years, opioid addiction soared in the US. After a crackdown at home, the US started exporting opioids to China. Yeah, you're not told that, are you? That's important, so let me say that again. The modern opioid addiction tragedy started with a US product that was distributed all over America and eventually exported to China. Not the other way around. Number five, in October 2017, a US Justice Department official told a newspaper that most illicit fentanyl and fentanyl analogues come from China. This was widely reported, but investigations showed that while there were some sources from China at the time, the vast majority of the product did not cross the Pacific. It was discovered that Mexican cartels had been making the drug since 2005, using precursor chemicals from around the world, including from China. Number six, by 2019, China was making all types of medicines and found itself criticised by the US. Responding in characteristically uncompromising fashion, China classified the entire class of fentanyl-type drugs and 2 key fentanyl precursors as restricted items in May 2019. China was the first country in the world to do so. The Chinese took other drastic steps too. To halt illegal export of drugs, they introduced real name registration of senders and receivers. China introduced a process of examining and x-raying parcels and stepped up examination of cross-border packages to the US. Number 7. During this tough crackdown period, China's National Narcotics Control Commission and Ministry of Public Security maintained close coordination with their US counterparts. China's Institute of Forensic Science also joined the war on drugs. The joint crackdown succeeded. By September 2019, illicit movement of fentanyl-related substances from China seized by the US dropped to 0. The US expressed appreciation to China and noted drug control as a highlight in bilateral cross-country law enforcement cooperation. China and the US even held a joint press conference. Happy days. But they wouldn't last. Politics would get in the way. But first, there was a curious mystery, and that leads us to number 8. People on both sides of the Pacific were puzzled. Despite China's success in stamping out the delivery of precursors to the US, the problem was worsening. While focusing on China, the US's Drug Enforcement Administration had missed the fact that most of the drug was actually being manufactured by Mexican drug cartels. The agency was slow to respond as Mexican cartels supplanted Chinese producers, the Washington Post reported. Meanwhile, China continued to cooperate with the US when America gave China a list of 9 Chinese individuals secretly involved in the opioid trade. The Chinese courts gave them severe penalties, including a suspended death sentence for the ringleader. Number 9. But the successful joint operation by the US and China didn't last. The US accidentally killed it. In 2020, it put the Chinese Institute of Forensic Science, the investigative group doing a lot of the anti-drug work, onto its sanctions list. How come? The US did this as part of a scattergun approach to use a guilty until proven innocent stance to attack organizations in northwestern China. The Chinese responded by asking that the US instead abide by the rule of law. But the US had to attack the science group as part of their Uyghur genocide narrative, even though it had been widely discredited by that time. Number 10. In November last year, America's leader tried to get back on a good footing on this particular topic with China's leader. Biden asked for a total halt in the sale of all possible precursor chemicals, including those that were entirely legal with legitimate uses. Now, that was a big ask. In return, China asked Biden to remove the ridiculous sanctions on China's forensic scientists. Today, the countries, I'm glad to say, are working together again. Okay, so that's the real story. Opioid addiction is a US-originated problem, and the Chinese have repeatedly created tough laws to stop their citizens taking advantage of US addictions. But here's the worrying thing. Gangs located in Mexico and Canada are making the drug now in significant amounts, far more than they can use themselves, and they're exporting. Canada's Health Bureau reported recently that Canadian versions of fentanyl are being sold in Australia and New Zealand. India has also been producing this stuff. So the problem is likely to continue. Now, the real issue may be the fact that American society too often tends to be divisive and adversarial. So, of course, people get stressed out. They need painkillers. What's needed is less over-politicization of issues and less of this ridiculous fear-mongering that drives politics there. But as the US enters an election cycle, that may be too much for us to hope for. Look, if you're American and you're stressed out, don't take pills. Come live here in Hong Kong. Peaceful, low-crime city. Stay cool. Read widely.